Hi, hello, my name is Kayla. I am a writer and creative human being. I currently have one poetry collection out that you can purchase now if you're interested. I am also currently in the middle of working on a high fantasy duology. The first book is right now called Between the Waves, and I'm in about draft 3. I wanted to do a bit of a different video today that I've kind of been thinking about for a while as things pop into my mind. And I wanted to go over some false assumptions that I had about writing a novel for the first time that kind of stuck with me and then were like debunked as I continued to write the first drafts of novels. And I just wanted to share them because I imagine if you're writing a novel for the first time, you're working on your first book, you're planning things out, there are probably a lot of things that you've heard and maybe make it seem like a much more intimidating process. And I kind of just wanted to talk about the false assumptions that I made about writing a novel for the first time and hopefully make you feel a little bit better about this first time process and just give you some insight into what it's really like writing a first draft for the first time. So the first assumption that I had was that you had to absolutely know your characters 1000% before starting to write them. And this is something that I have actually struggled a lot with in all of the manuscripts as well as all of the different drafts of manuscripts that I've written, was this idea that I couldn't even start writing until I had a better grasp on the characters. And to be fair, I think this assumption came half from other people's influence but half from myself, because the first novel that I ever fully finished, I actually didn't know my characters that well and it became kind of a huge issue. But then what happened was that I kind of went all the way to the other side of the spectrum and I managed to convince myself that I could not work on another draft of that story. I couldn't work on a new story. I basically just couldn't keep writing until I knew my characters inside and out, every little secret they had, every story that they had growing up, everything about them. I could not start writing again until I knew those things. And I feel like this is especially something that's easy to believe when you want to write a character-driven story. But I'm here to tell you that you're allowed to start the first draft or even the second draft or even the third draft while still not knowing everything there is to know about your characters. I think when it comes to this assumption, I really underestimated the value of discovery writing, which basically just means when you start writing, you also start learning about the world and the magic system and also your characters. So you don't have to know them inside and out 1000% before you start writing. It's good to know the basics and to know what is motivating them, but you don't have to know everything. I feel like I've seen those like character sheets as well on Pinterest and even in classes that I've taken, that it's like 4 straight pages of questions to answer about your characters before you even start writing about them, and I feel some of it is just too much, and it made me think that I needed to have those things decided. Stuff like what was their favorite color when they were a kid, and what are their top 5 favorite people, and just like random things that I understand the purpose of adding them to a character sheet just because the whole point is to start to get to know your character a bit better. But I feel like I also took that and kind of believed that if I didn't have those things, I couldn't be writing about the character yet. Second assumption that I made when I was drafting for the first time is that pantsing was better than plotting, and also vice versa. I feel like I switched back and forth between these two. Like for a long time I believed that pantsing was better, and I feel like I researched famous authors who talked a lot of shit about people who plotted a lot and said that it was unnatural to have the whole story planned out, or it wouldn't feel organic, or there wouldn't be the right kind of flow if you had the whole story plotted out. And I think there's always a time and place for fully pantsing it and just seeing what happens in discovery writing. But I also think, and I have found over the past few years of writing consistently, that setting up a good solid plot takes away so many headaches, and it also helps you, or it helped me at least, create such complex subplots and arcs, and it just helped me keep track of everything much better, and it helped me plan things out in a way that I think is going to be so much more satisfying than if I had just pantsed the entire manuscript and then tried to go back and edit it so it made sense. And I think, again, because people have also argued the other way that plotting is always better than pantsing, I think that you should just take both assumptions from either side and throw them out the window, because there's going to be a mix of plotting and pantsing no matter who you are, and it's just kind of going to depend on your brain and also how you're feeling when you're working on that particular project. Third false assumption, and one that I'm sure all of you can relate to, especially if you are active on the internet, is the idea that traditional publishing is far better than indie publishing. This is a pretty natural assumption that I think most authors, especially in my age group and older, have gone into the industry believing, because most of us were only at like the beginning of seeing just how valid and how good of an option indie publishing is. And most of us grew up in a time when there weren't really indie published authors. Like, it was all traditionally published. That was the way to get your book out there. You had to pass the gatekeepers, and if you couldn't pass the gatekeepers of the industry, your story just wasn't good enough to get out to the world. Obviously, I have since learned that that is so far from the truth, and that assumption was just based on growing up learning about one certain type of publishing, which is traditional publishing. And since then, I have learned that indie publishing is a fantastic option depending on what you're looking for. And I have also learned that there are so many incredible books that never make it past industry gatekeepers, like traditional literary agents and publishers, because it's not the right time, or it's not on trend, or they don't think the book will make enough money even if it is an incredible story, or they don't have the marketing budget for it, or they just were tired that day that they picked up the query letter. And obviously it is easier to self-publish a book as far as like gatekeeping goes, because there is no gatekeeping. Technically, anyone can publish a book, anyone can self-publish a book. Obviously that comes with a whole host of other issues that could arise, but after I have spent years now doing research into both sides, trying to figure out which way I want to go, and it has completely erased the assumption for me that traditional publishing is better than self-publishing. And now it has truly just come down to which is going to work better for you and your story, and the way you want to tell it, and the way you want to get it out to the world. Another assumption that I had is that the quality of the first draft has to be good, or like a decent level as far as quality of writing goes. This is so far from the truth. Like, obviously going into it, I knew that the first draft was going to be the worst of all of the drafts that I wrote, because ideally the trajectory is that you get better as you write more drafts. But I really thought that even the first draft had to be pretty close to how it was going to be when it was published, and then you kind of just edited here and there, and that was how you got a publishable book. And now I have come to the realization that the first draft is just the messiest thing ever. Some people write beautiful, clean first drafts, but I think most of us write a first draft that is like either 50,000 words too short or too long. It's got countless grammatical errors that you know are wrong, but you kind of just left them in there. It's got paragraphs where you're not even really writing the story. You've got like in brackets what's supposed to happen in that section of the paragraph, and that's pretty much it. Things don't make sense, entire characters disappear or appear, plot lines just like fall off into the abyss, and it's really destroyed the assumption that I had that there had to be like a certain standard of a first draft, because truly the first draft can be quite literally whatever you want it to be, and it can be whatever you need it to be in order to start fleshing out the rest of the story, and in order to build it into something really incredible that's going to go out to the world. So yeah, first draft does not need to be good. That was an assumption that I had. I was like, oh, it has to be at least a little bit good, you know? It really doesn't. It can be a complete dumpster fire of a manuscript, and you can still create something really incredible out of it. Next assumption that I had was that you need to write sequentially, and I don't know why I had this assumption. I guess it's just like a very natural flow when we're telling a story. Like when we're telling a complete story, or when we're reading a complete story, obviously it's going to be sequential. It's going to go in the order of events that they happen. And you're not telling the story by like starting at the end or in the middle and then jumping back and forth. Generally, that's not how the final version of the story is going to be told. So I think that's why I had the assumption that the first draft needed to be written in the order that it happened. But obviously I have since learned that you can write the story in whatever order you want. You can start with the ending, and for some people I would highly suggest starting with the ending, because if you know the end point that you have to get to and how all the plot lines are tied off and finishing, that can be such a powerful way for you to write an even better first draft if you have written the ending already. Or maybe you go through and you write the inciting incident and then the midpoint and then the climax, because those are the scenes that you have in your head. You're allowed to write whatever part of the story you want at first and then fill in the blanks as you go. And I think for a lot of people, this is going to make telling the story a lot easier, because you get to start with what you already know and then you get to fill in from there and like use the momentum to keep your writing going. And my last false assumption that I had about writing when I started doing it a bit more seriously, I guess, is that if you quit on a manuscript, if you shelve a manuscript, if you end up not finishing the story, or even if you do finish the first draft but you decide to not work on it anymore because you fall out of love with it, or you just don't know like where to take it and you've decided it's not worth the effort, don't count that as a failure. I feel like I really struggled with shelving Blood of Amberum, which was the first like full-length fantasy fiction novel that I finished in 2021, I think. And I struggled with that so much because I thought that if I decided to stop working on this book, it meant that I had failed as a writer. But since then, not only have I just like started following other people's journeys and like learning about what the writing journey looks like for other people, but I've also looked at my own writing journey and realized that when I was a kid, I had like probably 20 stories that I started and then quit and never finished. And as long as I kept writing, like as long as I kept starting new stories and as long as I kept picking up a story and working on it and coming up with new ideas and going through that process and improving my craft, it was never going to be a failure. And I feel like I found a stat one day, I'll see if I can find it again, but even traditionally published authors who are very, very well known tend to have at least like 2 or 3 stories that they've written, 2 or 3 completed books that aren't the ones that end up getting published. And for a lot of them, they have even more than that. Like they could have 5 to 10 different manuscripts that they have started working on and then decided not to finish or decided to put away once they had finished it because it just wasn't going to be the story that got published. And I think we also have this feeling that like once you quit on a manuscript or once you shelve it, you're never allowed to go back to it, which I think is also why we associate that with failing as a writer, because you just created this entire story for months or years on end and now you've just put it away so it doesn't count anymore. Which is just like so false, because every single story that you work on is improving your craft and showing you how to explore character arcs and learn more about your characters and create more complex and intricate plot lines that you're going to be so much happier with. And like all of that is really, really good practice for the manuscript that comes afterwards that might become the one that gets published. So yeah, I definitely had this assumption that I was like, now that I'm being serious about it, you know, if I decide to shelve this manuscript that I just spent the whole year working on and I've written 120,000 words of it, if I shelve it, if I don't do anything with it, if it never gets published, I've failed. And something that I remind myself now and that I like to tell myself is that as long as I keep writing, I've never technically failed. And because I know that I'll be writing for the rest of my life, I might take breaks here and there, but like I'm probably going to be writing until my deathbed. I like to delusionally tell myself that that means that as long as I keep writing and keep working on new stories until the day I die, I actually technically can never fail. If my definition of failure is to just quit writing and never do it again, then I'm literally never gonna fail. And I feel like there's something really validating for me in believing that. So if you need to believe that too, by all means. If you never stop writing, you never fail. You can put away your first 10 manuscripts that you ever write, but as long as you keep writing and as long as you start a new one and you just keep telling your stories, which is the whole point of this, humans are natural storytellers. It's what we do. We're creatives. This is how we communicate with each other and how we share our message with the world. As long as you keep doing that, you have never failed. Not in my eyes, at least. So yeah, those are 6 assumptions that I had about writing when I first started to write a book seriously, and when I first decided that I was gonna publish something one day. Those are all assumptions that I had about the process, and especially about that first draft, that now, 4 years later, I have realized are completely false. and were really just like pieces of fear that I think I was using to hold myself back a little bit because I just was scared. I mean, it's really scary to write, 100,000 words for the first time and decide that you're gonna take on the work that it requires to make that into something publishable and make that into the story that you want to share with the world. I feel like that is really scary and daunting and does require a lot of effort. So it's no wonder that we have these assumptions that like make us feel like we can't do that or make us feel like we're not doing it the right way, because it's a huge thing to take on. But I hope that if you're feeling like that about any part of your writing process, I hope that this video alleviated a bit of the anxiety that you had around those assumptions and reminded you that they're really not true. You can do whatever you want. You're an artist. You can create however you want. And I hope that that came across in this video. So thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to smile, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.